Hey everyone, it's Y again. For this video, I want to take a close look at the upcoming game, Croc and the Legend of the Gobbos Remaster, to see how faithful it appears to be turning out. At the time of this video, no release date has been announced, outside of sometime this year, which means we aren't too far off from this game's release. And just to be perfectly clear, this is a first impression video, which means I've had no hands-on experience with playing this remaster. I'm basing everything in today's video off of what Argonaut Games has shared so far. I'm specifically going to focus on how the remaster compares to the original PlayStation version, since that appears to be considered the best out of the official ports, those being the original PlayStation, the Sega Saturn, the PC, and technically the Game Boy Color version as well. For the sake of properly representing the game, I've captured all my PlayStation gameplay in this video on my original PlayStation console with an S-video cable to get an authentic yet clear picture. I will clearly label when I use other sources for capturing gameplay. With that said, let's begin the analysis by focusing on the areas that make a good first impression. The game is now running in widescreen and what appears to be a higher frame rate. Argonaut Games has confirmed that the game will have modern analog controls with an improved camera, while also keeping the tank controls on the D-pad. While it may not be everyone's preferred way to play, I do hope they have an option to toggle the classic camera and controls back on. As you can see from the comparison and gameplay, I was struggling quite a bit to position the camera the way I intended. The way the camera moves in the remaster appears to be much more wieldy. Moving the camera in a similar manner has proved too difficult to replicate on the original PlayStation version of the game, even with the analog controls. Textures, models, and lighting have all been updated in this remaster. Thankfully, for those who prefer the classic visuals, Argonaut Games has provided a number of graphical display modes that changes the visuals of the game. The graphics display modes includes a remastered mode that makes use of all the new textures, models, and lighting, retro mode that uses all the old visuals for that classic experience, a remastered models only option for using only the new models, retro smooth textures that smooths over that pixelated look for those old textures, a remastered textures only option that only changes the textures to the newer, higher resolution ones, and finally, an enhanced lighting mode for the use of the better lighting. This mode may be a modern take on the PC-specific lighting effects option in the game's original release. The PC version had the ability for objects to cast light when they were collected. The effect was very subtle, but in this remaster version, it seems to be much more prominent. And for good measure, here's a quick comparison between the retro and remastered modes so you can get a good idea of how these changes affect the game's visuals. There's also a couple of retro display modes as well. When enabled, these add a filter over the game's visuals for an even more retro look. There's a CRT display so that the game appears as if it were being played on an old tube TV, and a VGA retro display, which mimics the look of old PC monitors. A small yet appreciated new feature is that bosses now have health bars. Before, you really had no idea how much health a boss had, and it could be a bit difficult at times to tell if you did cause damage to a boss. The addition of a boss health bar should clear up those issues. While there's certainly a lot to like in this upcoming release, not everything is looking shipshape. There's a number of aspects that got my attention that appeared to need some work. This first one, in my opinion, is the biggest issue, and that is the remaster seems to lack audio reverb in the cave environments. First, let's take a listen between the PlayStation and the PC ports.
Kaboof!
Hear the difference? Now let's compare the PlayStation to the upcoming remaster. The lack of reverb in the remaster version's cave areas is concerning. While it seems to have been only present in the PlayStation version for the game's original release, I see no reason why that should still be the case for the remaster. Anyways, moving on. While the HUD is a higher resolution than what we've seen before, it does lack some of that design that gives the game its character. The crystal counter, seen in the upper left-hand corner, uses a generic white-colored typeface. Here's a look at each version of the crystal counter, excluding the Game Boy Color one. For the image of the crystal, it looks like they kept close to the PC design, and for the number typeface, it looks like they used a smaller version of the Croc 2 design of all things. The pink typeface gave the old design some charm, and I'd like to see that one return over the one that's been shown off currently. I'd also like to see the size of the numbers and their placement be more similar as how the PlayStation did it. To me, that just looks best visually. The other HUD related issue that jumps out at me is that when you collect a colored crystal, it shows which ones you've collected in the level in the top middle area of your screen. The collected crystals used to spin in place, but now they just sit statically. Moving on to the next issue, you may have already noticed it. The end level gong's wooden stand doesn't match the design of the PlayStation one. In fact, this change happened back on the PC release and is carried over to the remastered version. While the remastered graphics are generally an improvement, I do think they require a bit more work to better encapsulate the original visuals of the game. Some textures seem to give off a slightly glowing effect, which I think is being caused by the new enhanced lighting setting. It's specifically prevalent on the ground textures. This effect is a bit of an eye strain, and the graphics would look better, in my opinion, if they would lower that effect down just a bit. The last point of concern that I want to bring up is a bug with the retro mode. When enabled, it's supposed to revert the visuals back to their classic look. But as you can see here, in the gameplay, here's the lava and it still has that remastered graphics appearance. Okay, now on to a change that I didn't want to categorize as either good nor bad. The height of some of the skyboxes appear to have been altered. In the PlayStation version, the skybox sat low enough where you couldn't see the mountains while standing on this platform. To show that the PlayStation skybox has always had these mountains, I've captured this gameplay using an emulator and a GameShark code to super jump to get a better view of the skybox. As you can clearly see now, those mountains have always been there, and what seems to have been changed is that the skybox seems to have been raised in the remaster. Here's a screenshot from the same platform as seen earlier, this time taken from the Saturn version of the game. What I think may be happening is that the team at Argonaut Games could be picking the best elements out of each version of the game for this remaster. You can also see that same change made to the level Hassle in the Castle as well. From what I can tell so far, this isn't a universal change to every skybox, but what I do see does seem to be a net positive. Skyboxes are meant to be seen and not tucked away, which this change achieves. Which now takes us to the last topic that I want to cover, which is known as the Crocipedia. This serves as sort of the archive for the development of the game. It's been confirmed to contain development assets, game design documents, concept art, animations, team member interviews, and more. While those are all great, I'd still like to see things such as print ads, the official strategy guide, promotional renders, commercials, and maybe even a music player would be nice. And on top of all that, I wouldn't get my hopes up too high because I do realize it's a big ask. I do think it would be really cool to see early builds of the game made playable here. Croc has quite a bit of content that has never made it into the final game. There's even some early builds that have found their way out into the public's hands. There's a lot of potential content that could be included in the Crocipedia, but we won't know what makes the cut until the game finally gets released. To wrap things up, based off everything I've seen so far, this remaster is shaping up to be a good one, with the caveat that Argonaut Games needs to nail the modern controls and fix some underlying issues, notably the lack of reverb in cave areas. Here's hoping they can stick the landing and have Croc back in the spotlight after such a long absence. That'll do it for this video. If you enjoyed what you saw, consider hitting that like button and subscribing to my channel for even more content. Thanks for watching and have a good one.